Hey everyone, this is Heidi from the blog Hands Occupied with another tutorial for you. In this video, I'm going to share tips and tricks for how to keep your yarn from splitting while you work with it. A common question that a lot of crocheters have is how to deal with yarn when it's splitting while you work, and ideally how to keep yarn from splitting while you work. So I've got a few tips for you today. One of them is to begin by taking a look at your yarn. So here's 3 different yarns here. I've got this teal and pink situation happening. And right here is a light worsted weight yarn that's got a lot of nice twist to it. And you can see even looking at the end of it that not a lot of fraying is happening all by itself. But then we've got this yarn here that has a whole bunch of strands to it, but it pulls apart like crazy and it splits a lot when you work. And then we've got this yarn here that's a single ply and it's polyester, so there's nothing that can split because it is a single piece of fiber. So when I say the word ply, I mean, think of like the different plies of toilet paper. It's the amount of strands that come together to form the larger piece of yarn. This has probably 3 or 4 plies. Looks like 3, and this one has several because you can see all these little strands, and again this one just has 1. So pay attention to your fiber selection if you're very sensitive to yarn splitting as you work. Some other pro tips I have for you guys today are to think about the tool you're using in your crochet if you're running into a lot of splitting. So these 2 hooks right here are both a USI or an I9, a 5.5 millimeter size hook. They're both even red. But you can see if you look at the tips of the hooks here that they both are hook shaped, but one of them tapers more at the top into like a cone shape, and there's a little bit of a point at the end that goes down into a cone shape as well around the hook. Then on this hook, it's more of a perfect cylinder with a notch cut straight into it. There's not a huge amount of tapering except right at the very tip of the hook. And so some crocheters, depending on the style of your crocheting, your personal technique for your crochet, you might want to experiment with hooks that have different shaped tips or maybe sharper or duller tips if you find yourself splitting a lot of yarn as you work. Another easy tip, which a lot of makers probably don't want to hear because knitting and crochet take up a lot of time to do, if you're dealing with a lot of that splittage of your yarn in your crochet, you might want to consider working a little slower. Because if you keep splitting your yarn, you'll be able to see the kind of shabbiness in your finished project. So working a little slower is also a good tip. And another one is if you're someone who, when you're working in your crochet and you find that your yarn, let's just pretend this single ply is the example. If you find that your yarn is twisting a lot, like twisting like this in one direction or the other, so getting a tighter twist or a looser twist, so basically getting more tightened or more unwound, you might want to take the time in between rows or rounds of your crochet to physically undo those twists. One way to know if you're doing a lot of twisting in your crochet is if when the fibers fold in half, if they twist together kind of like this or kind of like a yarn hank, you'll know that there's a lot of extra twist happening in your yarn because of whatever you're doing with your technique. It's introducing those extra twists or untwists. And again, if you just take a moment between rows to let your work untwist or get retwisted, that will help with that splitting issue you might be running into. And then my last big tip for you in this video for dealing with yarn as it splits in your crochet is to actually use a little bit of a higher quality yarn with some more natural fibers in it. Wool naturally sticks to itself. It's one of the reasons that wool is kind of the go-to iconic knitting fiber or crochet fiber. It naturally sticks to itself a little bit like Velcro. It's why yarn and clothes are made with so much wool. Wool and other natural fibers, not just wool, certain fibers have certain interlocking capabilities, not unlike Velcro, and that helps the yarn stick to itself, but also each stitch stick to itself as well. So those are just a couple of tips that I have for you for dealing with splitting in your yarn. So remember to take a look at your fiber before you work with it, to work slower, to think about the right tools for your technique, to think about whether or not your yarn is twisting or untwisting, and to also consider using natural fibers that's like to stick to themselves. We hope you enjoyed this crochet video tutorial. If you have any comments or questions for us, go ahead and let us know in the comments, and don't forget to tune in again soon for even more video tutorials.